Cowboy found Apache beaten beside Deadwood, and the knife left behind demanded balance. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the western horizon when Nathan Walker, a lone cowboy, came across the body. He had been riding through the dry, cracked earth near Deadwood, his horse's hooves kicking up the dust in the fading light. It had been a long, tiresome day, but there was something about the stillness of the air that made him uneasy. Then he saw her. A woman, lying motionless beside a small, dry creek. Her clothes were torn, her skin bruised and bloodied, her face pale and covered in dirt. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, and he quickly dismounted. Nathan knelt beside her, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of the attacker. The woman was Apache, her features unmistakable. Her hair, long and dark, framed her face in messy strands, and the beads around her neck glinted faintly in the dying light. But what struck Nathan most was the knife. It lay just a few inches from her hand, its blade stained dark with blood, the hilt engraved with intricate patterns. It was as if the knife itself had a story to tell, a story that demanded balance. Nathan's heart raced as he carefully turned the woman over, noticing the deep cuts on her arms, the bruises on her face. The brutality of the attack was undeniable. Yet, there was no sign of the attacker. Nathan hesitated, unsure of what to do. He wasn't accustomed to dealing with people from the Apache tribe, but he had seen enough in his time as a cowboy to know when a life was hanging by a thread. As he gently lifted the woman into his arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that the knife was meant for something more than just violence. It was as if it were a symbol, a message. The night grew colder, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. As he made his way back to his camp, he couldn't help but wonder what had led to this. Who had left her here, beaten and broken? And more importantly, why had the knife been left behind? Nathan's mind raced as he made the decision to help her, to take her back to his cabin and tend to her wounds. He didn't know what awaited him, but he felt a strange pull, a sense of duty he couldn't ignore. The journey back to his camp was long, and the silence of the night seemed to press in on him from all sides. He kept his eyes on the horizon, trying to make sense of the situation, but it was hard to ignore the weight of the knife, now tucked securely in his bag. It was a symbol of balance, he thought. But balance for what? He had no answers, only questions. As Nathan finally arrived at his cabin, he carefully laid the woman down on his bed, his hands shaking as he worked to clean her wounds. The cold wind outside howled through the cracks in the walls, but inside, the warmth of the fire provided a small comfort. Nathan watched over the Apache woman, his thoughts swirling. He had no idea what had happened to her, or why she had been left for dead, but one thing was certain, he couldn't just leave her. Not like this. Not without understanding what had brought her here. And the knife? It would remain a mystery for now, but Nathan knew it would demand an answer. A balance that had yet to be struck. The wind howled through the cracks in Nathan's cabin as he tended to the woman's wounds, the fire crackling in the hearth casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He had carefully undressed her, revealing the full extent of the damage done to her body. Bruises marred her arms and legs, and her face was swollen from the beatings she had endured. Despite the severe injuries, there was a calmness to her. Her breathing was steady, her eyes closed in a deep, almost meditative state as Nathan worked. The knife, tucked safely in his bag, felt heavier with each passing minute, a constant reminder of the violence that had brought this woman to his door. Who had done this to her? And why was she left to die out here, alone in the wilderness? Nathan wiped the sweat from his brow as he applied a salve to the woman's wounds, his thoughts racing. The cold air outside seemed to creep into his bones, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the night held something more. The woman stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she simply stared at him, as if unsure of where she was or who was tending to her. Nathan held his breath, waiting for her to speak, but she remained silent. He wasn't sure what to say to her, especially considering their vast cultural differences. But one thing was certain, she wasn't just some random stranger. He could feel it in his gut. This was no coincidence. Nathan sat back, watching her closely, his mind spinning with questions. He had helped enough people in his life to know that there was always a story behind the pain, a reason why someone ended up in the state she was in. But he wasn't ready for the answer she might give. Slowly, the woman's eyes shifted toward the knife, still wrapped in cloth beside her. She reached out weakly, her fingers brushing against it. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. What did it mean? The woman's lips parted, and in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke. The knife demands balance, she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. Nathan leaned forward, confusion and curiosity battling within him. What do you mean by balance? He asked softly. The woman closed her eyes again, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. She didn't answer immediately, as if gathering strength to speak. Finally, she opened her eyes once more, locking her gaze with his. The balance is off, she said, her voice steady despite the weariness in her body. My people are coming. They will seek justice. Nathan's brow furrowed. He didn't understand what she was saying, but something about her tone told him that this wasn't just some idle threat. There was power in her words, and a deep sense of conviction. The knife, it seemed, was not just a weapon, but a symbol, one that demanded something in return. Something more than simple justice. Nathan nodded slowly, trying to make sense of her words. He had heard stories of Apache customs, of their fierce sense of justice, but he had never been involved in anything like this before. He had always kept to himself, avoided conflict, and kept his distance from the local tribes. But now, it seemed, the balance had shifted, and he was caught in the middle. As the woman fell into a restless sleep, Nathan sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The night was quiet, but his mind was anything but. The sound of hooves in the distance reached his ears, faint but unmistakable. Someone was coming. He didn't know who or why, but he knew that the woman's words were true. Her people were coming, and they would demand justice. But what kind of justice? Was it the kind he could stand behind, or was it a force too powerful for him to control? Nathan stood up, walking to the window and peering out into the darkened wilderness. The wind had picked up again, but this time it didn't feel as cold. It felt charged. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear, the knife was the key. The balance would be restored, but at what cost? As Nathan stood by the window, his mind raced with the weight of the situation. The hooves he had heard earlier were now closer, the sound unmistakable in the stillness of the night. His hand rested on the handle of his rifle, his fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the uncertainty of what was to come. The woman, still sleeping restlessly on the bed, had said her people were coming. She had said they would seek justice, but what kind of justice? Nathan didn't know if he was prepared for what would happen next. The Apache were a proud people, known for their fierce sense of loyalty and justice, but he had no experience with their ways. The balance she spoke of was something Nathan didn't fully understand, but he knew it was important. And he knew that he was in the middle of it. He turned away from the window, his gaze shifting back to the woman on the bed. She had not given him a name yet, and she had not explained what had happened to her. All he knew was that she had been beaten and left for dead, and now she was depending on him. The knife was still in his bag, heavy with meaning, its weight a constant reminder that something much larger than him was unfolding. The door creaked open, and Nathan froze, his eyes flicking toward the entrance. In the dim light, a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint glow of the campfire outside. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that gleamed in the darkness. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. Nathan Walker? The man's voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension in his words. Nathan instinctively reached for his rifle, but the man raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "I come alone," he said. "I'm here for the woman." Nathan's mind spun. How did this man know about her? And what did he want with her? He hesitated for a moment, his instincts screaming at him to protect the woman, to keep her safe. But he also knew that this man, whoever he was, had been watching. The question was, watching for what? "She's not ready to be seen," Nathan said, his voice firm but calm. The man's eyes flickered with a hint of recognition, but he didn't press the matter. Instead, he took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Nathan. "She is my kin," the man said, his voice low and steady. "And she has a debt that must be paid." Nathan's brow furrowed. "A debt?" "A debt of honor," the man replied. "One that can only be settled in blood." Nathan's grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't move. He was trying to make sense of the situation, but it was clear now that this was more than just a simple rescue. This was something much deeper, something tied to the Apache code of honor, something he didn't understand. "I don't know what you want from me," Nathan said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But I won't hand her over until I know she's safe." The man's gaze softened slightly, but his words remained firm. "She is safe with me. But there is more at stake than just her life. The balance is shifting, and we are here to restore it." Nathan's mind raced, but he didn't have time to question the man further. His instincts told him that this was a moment of reckoning, a moment where everything could change. The man took another step forward, this time reaching into his bag and pulling out a small leather pouch. "The knife she carries," the man said, holding it out to Nathan. "It is a symbol. A symbol of justice. It must be returned to its rightful place." Nathan stared at the pouch, his thoughts racing. He had felt the weight of the knife ever since he had found it, but he hadn't understood its significance until now. The man's words struck him like a thunderclap. This wasn't just about the woman, or even the knife. This was about something much larger. "I don't know what you expect from me," Nathan said, his voice low. "But I can't just hand over a life without understanding why." The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "You will understand soon enough," he said, his voice steady but filled with a strange intensity. "The knife has already chosen you. Now you must decide." Nathan felt the weight of the decision settle heavily on his chest. The woman's life, the justice she sought, and the balance that had been disrupted, it was all in his hands now. He wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew that whatever happened, it would change everything. As the man turned and walked away, Nathan stood still, staring at the knife in his hand, the weight of its meaning pressing down on him. The balance, he realized, was more than just a matter of justice. It was a matter of fate. Nathan stood motionless, the small leather pouch still in his hand. His fingers curled around the edges, feeling the smooth texture of the leather, but his mind was far away. The man who had come to him, speaking of debts and balance, had left as quietly as he had arrived. Nathan was left with the weight of decisions pressing down on him, the silence of the night filling the spaces between his thoughts. The woman lay in the bed, still unconscious, but her breathing had steadied. The faint crackle of the fire in the hearth was the only sound in the room, a contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in Nathan's mind. He had always lived alone, by choice, far from the bustle of the town and the complexities of the world. But now, it seemed, his solitude had come to an end. The Apache woman's arrival had shifted everything, pulling him into a situation he had never anticipated. The balance she spoke of, it wasn't just her life that was in jeopardy. It was something larger. The Apache man had said the knife demanded balance, but balance for what? And why had it chosen Nathan? He glanced at the bag again, and then at the woman. Her features were calm now, but there was something about the way she had looked at him earlier, her eyes full of understanding, as if she knew something he didn't. He felt the pressure of her gaze even now. He had promised to protect her, but was he really in a position to do so? The man had been clear. He was part of something bigger, something that involved justice, and it wasn't just a personal matter. It was about restoring something that had been lost, something that Nathan didn't understand. The knife wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol. The Apache man's words echoed in Nathan's mind. The knife has already chosen you. Now you must decide. Nathan paced back and forth, the weight of those words sinking in. He had never been part of anything like this before. He was just a cowboy, a simple man trying to survive in a harsh world. But now, it seemed he was caught up in something that could change everything. The Apache tribe, their customs, their justice, he wasn't sure where he fit into all of it. The knife, though, was clear. It demanded action. And Nathan had to decide whether he would answer its call. He turned his gaze to the woman again, her face peaceful in sleep. What had happened to her? Who had done this to her? And why had she been left in such a state, so vulnerable? Nathan knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just let her go, not after everything she had been through. But there was more at stake than just her survival. There was a larger question of justice, one that Nathan was beginning to understand might not have an easy answer. The storm outside had died down, and the night was still. Nathan stood by the fire, the leather pouch still clenched in his hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that whatever came next, it would not be the same. The woman would wake soon, and when she did, there would be questions to answer. He wasn't sure he had the answers, but he knew that he couldn't run from this. He wasn't sure what his part in all of this was, but he knew one thing: the balance would be restored, whether he was ready for it or not. Nathan stood at the window, his eyes scanning the dark landscape outside. The air had grown colder, and the stillness of the night seemed to hang heavily in the air. He hadn't slept, not since the man had left, and now, as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The woman, who still lay motionless on his bed, had not awoken, but the knife, now placed carefully beside her, seemed to pulse with a silent demand. Nathan wasn't sure what it wanted, but he knew that somehow, he was part of it. He felt it in his bones. The quiet sound of hooves in the distance startled him from his thoughts. His gaze flicked toward the door. Someone was coming. He wasn't sure who, but the rhythmic sound of hooves told him it was more than one rider. The moment stretched in his mind as he looked back to the woman, her breathing steady, though faint. He had to make a decision. His hand tightened around the knife, the weight of it suddenly more pronounced, as if the object itself was guiding him. Should he wait for the riders? Should he confront them now, or hold the line and hope that the woman woke and explained everything? He didn't have the luxury of waiting. Nathan took a deep breath and stepped toward the door, keeping the knife with him as he opened it. The cold air rushed in, biting at his skin as he looked out into the morning light. The riders were almost upon him. There were 5 of them, their figures outlined by the pale sunlight, each one of them moving with the purposeful grace of someone who knew what they were doing. Nathan's grip on the knife tightened as they approached, their faces unreadable, their eyes fixed on him. The leader, a tall man with a stern expression, was the first to speak. "We seek the woman," he said, his voice low but firm. Nathan stood his ground, his heart racing, but his voice steady. "She's not ready to be seen," he said, the words coming out more forcefully than he intended. The leader nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without argument. "We are not here to harm her," the man replied. "We are here to bring balance." The words echoed in Nathan's mind, stirring something deep within him. Balance. It was the same word the woman had spoken. But what did it mean? Who were these men, and what kind of justice did they bring? "What kind of balance?" Nathan asked, his voice quieter now, but still firm. The leader didn't respond immediately. Instead, he dismounted and gestured for the others to follow suit. They moved as one, their movements synchronized, and it was clear that they were a tribe, a close-knit group bound by something much deeper than mere survival. "The balance that was broken," the leader said finally, "can only be restored by blood. The woman holds the key." Nathan felt a shiver run down his spine. Blood. The words sent a ripple of unease through him, but he didn't step back. He couldn't. The woman had already been through enough. He wasn't going to let her become part of some ancient debt or ritual, not without knowing the whole story. I don't understand, Nathan said, his voice quieter now, almost apologetic. Why is she here? What happened to her? The leader's eyes softened just slightly, a flicker of something akin to sympathy crossing his face. She is the last of her line, he said. Her father made a promise, one that must be kept. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. The weight of the situation was starting to settle in, but the more the leader spoke, the more Nathan realized how little he understood. He only knew that something much larger was at play, something that involved not just the woman, but her entire people. Her father? Nathan asked, struggling to piece everything together. The leader nodded. The debt she carries is one of honor. And it must be paid. Nathan shook his head. He didn't understand. Why me? He asked, his voice low. The leader looked at him intently. Because you are the one who found her. You are the one who must help restore the balance. The knife will guide you. Nathan glanced at the knife again, his mind racing. This was too much, too fast. He was just a cowboy. This wasn't his fight. But the words the leader spoke had a power to them, and the way the man looked at him, with a quiet expectation, told Nathan that he couldn't back down now. He had already crossed the line when he decided to help the woman, and now, the consequences of that decision were unfolding before him. The riders waited, their eyes never leaving Nathan. The weight of the knife in his hand felt heavier, the responsibility pressing down on him. What had he gotten himself into? He didn't know the answer. But as the riders gathered around him, he realized that he was no longer just a witness. He was a part of something much bigger, and he had to choose where he stood. Would he help restore the balance, or would he walk away, leaving the woman to face the consequences alone? The decision was his. And he had to make it now. Nathan's mind raced as the leader's words hung in the air, heavier than the chill of the morning. The knife, the woman, and now this strange group of Apache warriors. He was no longer a passive observer in this tale. Something had shifted, and the weight of that shift pressed down on him like the heat of a forge. He was being asked to decide, to be part of something far bigger than his simple life as a cowboy. The riders, still waiting patiently, seemed to sense his indecision. The leader, who had not yet spoken again, took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Nathan's face. It was clear that the choice was his to make, but the consequences of that choice felt like they could alter everything. Nathan glanced over his shoulder at the cabin, the woman still lying on the bed, her breathing steady but shallow. He felt a pang of guilt. Was he abandoning her by hesitating? What was he truly agreeing to by getting involved with these people? Was this something he could walk away from once he made his decision? The leader's voice interrupted his thoughts, calm and measured. The woman's fate is intertwined with the balance we speak of, he said, the words like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through Nathan's chest. What happens next will restore what has been broken, or it will continue to unravel. Nathan's pulse quickened. What was this balance? And why did it feel like he was standing at the edge of something he couldn't control? He took a deep breath and glanced at the Apache warriors standing silently behind the leader. There was no anger in their eyes, no sense of malice. They were not here to demand retribution, but something else, something that Nathan couldn't quite put into words. What do you need from me? Nathan asked, his voice steady, though the storm inside him hadn't abated. The leader regarded him for a moment, as if weighing Nathan's sincerity. Then, without a word, he reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden figure. It was a symbol Nathan didn't recognize, but it carried the same sense of ancient weight that the knife did. The figure was small, about the size of a man's hand, and it seemed to almost hum with a quiet energy. The leader held it out to Nathan. This is the key, he said, his voice soft but firm. The woman's debt can only be paid when this is returned to its rightful place. Nathan took the figure carefully, feeling the smooth wood in his palm. It was heavier than it looked, and there was something strangely compelling about it. He felt as if the figure was calling him, pulling him into a world he didn't understand. Where does it go? Nathan asked, still unsure of what was being asked of him. The leader's gaze softened, and for the first time, Nathan saw a hint of something like respect in his eyes. It must be taken to the heart of the land, the leader explained, his voice low and reverent. The place where the spirits are most alive. Only there can the balance be restored. Nathan nodded slowly, the weight of the task settling over him like a mantle. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this journey, but there was no turning back now. The Apache were waiting, and the woman's fate was tied to his decision. He could feel it in his bones. The silence stretched for a moment longer before the leader spoke again, this time with finality. Go to the heart of the land, he said, and return what was lost. If you succeed, the balance will be restored, and the woman will find peace. Nathan nodded again, his hand gripping the wooden figure tightly. It wasn't just about the woman anymore. It was about something larger, something ancient. And Nathan had a role to play in it. As the leader and the warriors mounted their horses and began to ride away, Nathan stood still, feeling the weight of their words settle over him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew this: he could not walk away. The balance had to be restored, and it was up to him to see it through. The sun had risen higher in the sky, and the day had begun. Nathan turned back toward the cabin, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He had a journey to make, and no idea what challenges lay ahead. But one thing was clear: this was no longer just about surviving in the wilderness. This was about restoring something far deeper than he could understand. He had taken the first step, and there was no turning back. Nathan spent the next several hours preparing for the journey ahead. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the land as he moved through the cabin, gathering what little he had. A rifle, a couple of blankets, a flask of water, and a few provisions, things he would need for a journey that could take days, maybe even weeks. He knew the Apache leader hadn't been specific about the exact location of the heart of the land, but something told Nathan that it would not be a simple trip. There would be trials ahead, things he couldn't predict. But it was clear now, this wasn't just about the woman. This was about the balance, and it was up to him to restore it. He looked once more at the wooden figure, still in his hand, the weight of it like a calling. The balance it symbolized, what did it really mean? His mind raced, but he could find no answers. Instead, he set the figure carefully inside his bag, strapped his rifle to his back, and slung the bag over his shoulder. He paused for a moment, staring at the cabin. The life he had known, solitary, quiet, and simple, felt distant now, as though it belonged to someone else. The wind picked up again, a chill in the air reminding him that the wilderness was still as harsh as ever. He stepped outside, the door creaking behind him as he closed it. His horse stood tied to a nearby post, waiting patiently. Nathan walked over, mounted, and without looking back, urged the horse forward. The landscape spread out before him, vast and unforgiving. It had always been his home, but now, it felt foreign, as though he were stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. The further he rode, the more the weight of his task settled over him. He wasn't sure what he was seeking, or what he would find when he reached this so-called heart of the land, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. The land, the Apache, the knife, it was all intertwined, and he had been swept into its current. Nathan rode for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky before it began to dip again, signaling the approach of evening. The land seemed to stretch endlessly, with no sign of the destination the Apache leader had spoken of. Nathan tried to make sense of it all, but the more he thought, the less clear it became. The Apache people were known for their deep connection to the land, their traditions rooted in respect for nature. But the balance, what was it? Why had the woman been so important to this journey? Was it her lineage? The debt her father had spoken of? Or was it the knife? As the night began to fall, Nathan found a small clearing, a perfect spot to set up camp for the night. He dismounted, unpacked his supplies, and built a fire. The warmth of the flames felt comforting, a small reminder of home, but it did little to ease the unease gnawing at his stomach. He knew he was not alone in this vast wilderness. but there was no sign of anyone following him. No sign of the Apache warriors. He wondered if they were watching from afar, waiting to see if he would succeed, or if they had already decided his fate. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound from the darkness, soft, almost imperceptible, but there nonetheless. Nathan's hand instinctively went to the rifle at his side, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. The noise came again, a rustle in the bushes just beyond the reach of the firelight. Nathan stood still, waiting. A figure emerged from the shadows, slowly stepping into the light of the fire. It was a woman, her features dark and sharp, her eyes steady as she met Nathan's gaze. He didn't recognize her, but there was something about her that felt familiar, as if he had seen her in a dream or a distant memory. She was dressed in traditional Apache clothing, and though she was alone, Nathan could sense the strength in her presence. She stopped a few paces from the fire, her gaze never wavering. "You seek the heart of the land," she said, her voice low and clear. Nathan's grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't speak. He wasn't sure if she was friend or foe. She took a step closer, and Nathan remained still, unsure of her intentions. "You are not ready," she said, her voice carrying a strange certainty. Nathan frowned. "Not ready for what?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension rising in his chest. The woman met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "The balance you seek is not something that can be found. It must be earned. And the path you walk will not be easy." Nathan didn't know what to say. The woman's words were cryptic, but there was truth in them, he could feel it. He had come this far, and now he had to decide whether he would continue down the path or turn back. He took a deep breath, his mind made up. "I'm ready," he said quietly, his voice firm. The woman nodded once, as if she had been waiting for him to say those words. "Then you must go," she said, turning and walking back into the shadows. Nathan stood there for a moment, the fire crackling softly behind him. He wasn't sure who she was or what role she played in all of this, but one thing was certain, the journey had only just begun. Nathan followed the woman's footsteps into the shadows, the firelight fading behind him as he moved into the dark, cool forest. The night air was thick with silence, the kind of stillness that only came in the deep wilderness, where the only sound was the soft crunch of his boots against the forest floor. He couldn't see her anymore, but he knew she was close, he could feel it. His senses were heightened now, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves making him pause, his rifle ready, though he hadn't seen any immediate threat. The further he went, the more the landscape seemed to shift. Around him, the trees grew denser, their branches tangled overhead, blocking most of the moonlight. The path he was following felt less like a trail and more like a journey into the unknown. It was clear that this wasn't just a physical journey, it was something deeper. The woman's words echoed in his mind, her warning lingering. "The balance you seek is not something that can be found. It must be earned." Nathan wasn't sure what exactly that meant, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was watching him, testing him. He pressed on, the faint glimmer of starlight guiding his way, until he reached a small clearing. The trees seemed to open up, revealing a vast stretch of land bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. It was here, in this quiet expanse, that Nathan finally stopped. The air felt different here, charged in a way he couldn't explain. He stood still for a moment, trying to take it all in. The weight of the journey was starting to settle on him. He didn't know where to go from here, but he knew he was closer to something. The balance the woman had spoken of, it felt closer now, as if he was on the edge of something important, something that could change everything. Nathan lowered his rifle and knelt in the grass, the cold earth beneath him grounding him in the moment. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the silence of the land wash over him. It was then that he heard it, the sound of hooves, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere beyond the trees. He stood quickly, his senses sharpening as the sound grew louder. Were they the Apache warriors? Had they followed him? Or was this something else? The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he scanned the clearing, his eyes darting between the trees. It wasn't long before the first rider emerged from the shadows. It was the woman. Nathan's heart skipped a beat as she rode toward him, her expression calm, her eyes steady as she met his gaze. She stopped a few feet away, dismounting gracefully from her horse. "You've come far," she said, her voice low and almost respectful. Nathan didn't speak at first. He didn't know what to say. The journey had taken him into a place he hadn't expected, and now, standing before the woman, he felt the weight of it all. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," he finally said, his voice uncertain. "What is this balance? Why did you bring me here?" The woman's gaze softened, and she stepped closer. "The balance is not something that can be explained in words," she said. "It is something that must be understood in the heart. The land, the people, the spirits, they are all connected. And it is up to you to restore what has been broken." Nathan nodded slowly, though he still didn't fully understand. "How do I do that?" he asked. "What does it mean?" She smiled faintly, the expression almost sad. "It means you must make a choice," she said. "A choice that will affect not just you, but everyone. You must decide what you are willing to sacrifice for the balance to be restored." Nathan's mind spun. Sacrifice. What did she mean? He had already given so much, his time, his safety, and now his own doubts were starting to take root. The weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. "And what happens if I fail?" he asked, his voice low. The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet understanding. "Failure is not the end, but it comes with a cost," she said. "The land will not forgive easily, and neither will the spirits." Nathan's chest tightened as the weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just about him. It was about something larger, something that could affect the very fabric of the world he had known. The Apache people had their way of life, their beliefs, their connection to the land, and now, it seemed, Nathan was part of it. There was no going back. He stood there for a long moment, the woman watching him, the moonlight illuminating her face, making it seem almost otherworldly. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he had to make a choice. And whatever it was, it would change everything. Nathan took a deep breath, his resolve slowly hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady. The woman nodded, and without another word, she turned and mounted her horse. "Then come," she said, motioning for him to follow. "The journey has only just begun." Nathan mounted his own horse, the weight of the decision still heavy in his chest, but now with a sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the balance was in his hands, and there was no turning back. Nathan followed the woman deeper into the wilderness, his horse's hooves barely making a sound against the forest floor. The path they took was narrow, winding through thick trees, the air rich with the scent of pine and earth. The moon above cast a faint glow, guiding them as they traveled further into the heart of the land. The woman rode ahead of him, her silhouette steady against the dark backdrop of the forest, her figure as much a part of the land as the trees themselves. Nathan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. He had been pulled into something far larger than he had ever imagined. The balance the woman had spoken of, it was real, and it was his responsibility now. What was he meant to do? What sacrifice would he need to make to restore what had been broken? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement ahead. The woman reined in her horse, and Nathan did the same. They had reached a small clearing, the trees opening up to reveal a large rock formation that seemed to pulse with energy. The air here felt different, heavier, as if the land itself was alive. Nathan felt a pull, something deep within him urging him forward. The woman dismounted and walked toward the rocks, her steps sure and deliberate. Nathan followed, his heart beating faster with each step. "This is where it begins," the woman said, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable sense of purpose. She paused in front of the largest rock, a smooth stone that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. It was covered in ancient markings, symbols that Nathan couldn't understand but somehow felt connected to. She reached out and placed her hand on the stone, closing her eyes as if communing with something far beyond him. Nathan stood back, watching in silence. The woman had always seemed so in control, so sure of what she was doing. But now, she appeared vulnerable, as though she were asking for something, pleading with the land itself to give its blessing. Moments passed before she spoke again, her voice softer now. "This is where the balance is restored," she said. "But only when the spirit of the land is ready." Nathan wasn't sure what she meant by that, but he felt the weight of her words settle deep inside him. The land, the spirits, it was all tied together in a way he couldn't fully grasp. He took a step closer, his eyes on the symbols etched into the stone. "How do I help?" he asked, his voice hesitant. The woman turned to him, her gaze steady. "You have already begun to help," she replied. "Your presence here is part of the balance. But the final step requires more than just your will. It requires your heart." Nathan's heart raced. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he knew the time had come to make the ultimate choice. The balance wasn't just something to be restored with a simple action. It was something that required him to give a part of himself, something he hadn't expected. "What must I do?" Nathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman stepped back from the stone, her eyes meeting his. "You must trust," she said, her words carrying a weight that Nathan couldn't ignore. "Trust in the land. Trust in the spirits. And trust in yourself." Nathan stood there, the weight of her words pressing down on him. The wind stirred around them, carrying with it the scent of earth and pine, the same air that had filled his lungs for years. It was familiar, yet somehow, it felt different now. The woman had told him that the land was alive, and now, Nathan understood what she meant. This was more than just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and he was a part of it. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs. He reached down, his fingers brushing against the stone, the ancient markings smooth beneath his fingertips. In that moment, he felt something stir inside him. It wasn't a voice, but a presence, a feeling that washed over him like a wave. The land was speaking to him, and he could feel its power, its history, its heartbeat. He opened his eyes, looking up at the woman. She was watching him closely, waiting for something, though he wasn't sure what. "I trust," Nathan said, his voice steady. The woman nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "Then the balance will be restored," she said. She stepped back, her gaze still on him. "But the journey is not over. It has only just begun." Nathan didn't know what the future held, but he knew that whatever came next, he was ready. He had chosen his path, and the land had accepted him. The spirit of the land was alive within him, and he was no longer just a cowboy. He was a part of something much larger, something that transcended time and space. As the woman turned and walked away, Nathan followed her, the weight of the stone still in his hand, the sense of the land's power still pulsing through his veins. The journey was far from over, but now, Nathan knew that he was ready to face whatever came next. The balance had been restored, and his place in the world was clearer than ever.